Hello everyone and welcome to the Knowledge Pool, your source for everything regarding the rules of Magic the Gathering. Today we'll be going over the 5 most common rules mistakes people make in a game of Commander. And now let's begin. So the first mistake is Commander leaving play. This was the newest rule that changed the Commander format, because it used to be that we had the replacement effect. If a commander would leave play, we could put them back in the command zone. Now they have changed a little bit so they could make the commanders with death triggers to work without having them remain in the graveyard. Specifically, if a commander dies or goes to exile, there is a stay-based action which can help us put it back in the command zone. So what this means is, let's say you have a commander like Elenda the Dusk Rose and someone kills it, let's say, with a Blasphemous Act. What could happen here is she goes to the graveyard as normal, then before her trigger goes on the stack, the game gives us a chance to put her back in the command zone. That is state-based action, and then her trigger goes to the stack because she died. Namely, here will trigger whether we leave her in the graveyard or we put her back in the command zone. This happens because state-based actions are checked before triggers go on the stack, so your opponent does not have a response between the trigger and putting it to the command zone to exile it from the graveyard. The same goes for exiling a commander, so if Elenda would be Source of Plowshares, we can choose when she goes to exile to be put back in the command zone. But she goes to the exile, that's the important part. Now commanders, if they would die or be exiled, they go to that appropriate zone and then we move them. A really important note here, because this is where the most common mistakes happen, is that state-based actions cannot be checked while we're in the middle of resolving a spell or ability. So if someone has a spell like, let's say, Necromantic Selection, and we have our commander on board, we cannot choose to have our commander go to the command zone, because by the time we would choose that, the spell would need to already resolve. So our opponent that casts Necromantic Selection has the option to actually take our commander from the graveyard before we have a chance to put him back on the command zone, and also an effect like Ghostly Flicker again, because it resolves immediately and the commander will be exiled between the resolution of the card. We cannot choose to put it on the command zone. Now what would happen if a commander were to put it to the hand or the library? Because those are hidden zones, the rule here is that is the old rule, so it's a replacement effect still. So let's say someone casts an Overloaded Cyclonic Rift, we have the option, instead of putting the commander into our hand, to put him onto the command zone. This happens because the library and the hand are treated as hidden zones, so the other would work, because let's say the commander returned to hand and then we were to put it back in the command zone if we wanted to, it's a secret card, so we cannot do that. And so for bounce and tacking or shuffling the commander to the library or put him on top or other effects like that, there is a replacement effect where you get to choose, so it will never go to the hand or the library if you didn't want to. An important note here is that phasing is not in any of these categories, so if you manage to phase some commanders out, you will follow the normal rules of phasing, and they don't have an option to actually put them back in the command zone, because phasing out something is not removing from the battle. Finally, two quick notes here. One, the replacement effect of putting the commander back to the command zone instead of the library of the hand can be invoked multiple times for the same event, which is not what normally happens with replacement effects. This is here to ensure that if you don't want your commander on the library or the hand, you get him in the command zone. And also a funny note is that if the commander is a merged permanent or a melded permanent and we choose to put him to the command zone using the previous method replacement effect, that permanent and all the other cards that represent the commander at that point will go to the command zone or the library if we choose to do so, or the hand. But keep in mind, the commanderness of the commander is what makes the commander castable from the command zone. So let's say you have a big mutate stack and somehow they would end up in your hand and you choose to put them back in the command zone, you can only cast your commander from the stack. The other cards are stranded forever. The second mistake is commander tax. So, when we cast our commander from the command zone, we have to pay 2 additional generic mana, so mana of any color or quality, for each time beyond the first of cast our commander from the command zone. Which means that, let's say, we play our commander dies, we recast him, it costs 2 additional mana. He dies again, we try to recast him, it costs 4 additional mana, and so on and so forth. Now, this tax applies only the amount of times the commander is cast from the command zone. If it's put into our hand on the board or anywhere else with any other ability, let's say command beacon, then it does not count from casting from the command zone and it would not add a tax. That's why commanders like Yoriko the Tiger Shadow and the Revi have an ability that allows them to be put into play, and so if you never cast them and always use the ability, even if they die 1,000 times, you don't have to pay any commander tax unless you choose to cast them using their regular mana cost. For mistake number 3, we have the commander damage. So commander damage is a unique thing to the commander format, which states that if a player is dealt 21 combat damage from one specific commander, they lose the game. That now means that it has to be from the same commander, no matter who controls that commander. So, say for example, I have a commander like Etali, the Primal Storm, and I have dealt to player 2, which is my opponent, 16 commander damage with my Etali. Now, if the other opponent gains control of Etali somehow and attacks that player and deals 6 more damage, that would be 22 commander damage from a single commander, and that is what is enough to make the player lose the game. If someone copies my commander, it does not count as a commander damage. Again, commanderness is a unique thing tied to our commander specifically, and that's only what counts as commander damage. Also, if somehow, let's say we have a big commander like Maelstrom Wanderer and someone manages to steal it and deal 21 damage to us with our commander, we still lose the game because the rules state that you have to be dealt exactly or more 21 damage from a single commander, no matter who controls and owns it. If we have partner commanders, the damage is tracked separately for each commander. Mistake number 4 is the uniqueness of a commander. What we mean by that is that if a card is our commander, is subject to a unique playset of rules, and rules specifically that make it always be our commander. A commander cannot lose its commanderness. And that's important because when our commander is on the battlefield, we always know where it is and that it is our commander, no matter what happens to it. Say, for example, someone plays a Song of the Dryads to our commander, that makes him to a land, then we find a way to animate that land. That animated land will still be our commander, and it will also count as controlling our commander for cards like Jessica's Will or Deflecting Shot. Also, if our commander somehow is turned face down, like an Ixidron for example, or somehow changes its shape on the battlefield, it always remains our commander. Funny thing is, with Ixidron, what happens is that as it enters play, all of the creatures go and become morphs, essentially. But because, again, the commanderness of a card is unique to the game, we always know where the commander is. If you don't know the identity, you technically know where the commander is. So if someone plays an Ixidron and you want to get your commander back, you can just talk with your opponent and decide to jump block to get your commanders back. Finally, for mistake number 5 is the stack usage and priority. This is more well suited for CDH games, but it's also important to play it correctly in more casual tables. The way priority works is how magic works, and we need to be well established with the stack to understand that. So when we play something and someone plays something in response, that resolves first and then our thing resolves. The way priority works in a multiplayer game is that the active player generally has priority. So let's say it's our turn and we are on main phase. We have an option to play a land which doesn't use the stack, and let's say we cast a Sol Ring. If we cast a Sol Ring because we cast a spell, we have priority after that. If we choose to do nothing, the priority shifts to the next opponent in turn order and goes clockwise until it reaches our last opponent in turn order, and if no one does something, the spell resolves and we get priority back again. Now what's important here, because it actually changes how the game works, is how triggers are stacked in a multiplayer game. So let's say I cast Sol Ring. My next opponent in order has a Rhystic Study, the third opponent has a Mystic Remora, and the fourth opponent has an Esper Sentinel. And the Sol Ring is the first spell I cast this turn. I cast my Sol Ring, and then what happens is, after the spell is put to the stack and before I'm able to get priority to do anything else, the second player Rhystic Study will trigger, the third player Mystic Remora will trigger, and the fourth player Esper Sentinel will trigger. And they will resolve in that order. So Esper Sentinel first, the Remora, and the Rhystic Study. While those abilities are resolving, I have a choice to pay any amount of mana to not make them active. If I don't pay for anything, they all draw a counter and are all happy. Now, if one of them were to cast a spell after those triggers have been put on the stack, they would get priority, and then the priority would move clockwise from them. So what's important to know here is, because it's a very common thing that happens in Commander games due to the spirit of the format, is that say player 1 tries to cast something. We have player 4 immediately jumping in and say, okay, I will counterspell. First things first, that is not correct, because you don't have priority yet and you essentially not giving your opponents the option to do something. And also it's not strategically correct, because since you are the last player and you have the last available response in your disposal, you can choose to wait to see if someone else would counter a spell from an opponent. This is a very important thing to start learning about, because it will let you find avenues of play which you wouldn't consider, and sometimes the turn order is so important, especially if you have like an Aristocrat's Mirror with Blood Artist triggers, because essentially the third player is always the last to resolve. So for that reason, it's better to do it on another player's turn than in yours. This is a really quick example of how priority works. I plan to do a separate video on priority specifically in the future, because it's just an important and interesting thing about the game of Magic the Gathering, how the stack works and how can manipulate things to help us get the better of our opponent in some situation. And even though Commander is a more casually oriented format, understanding priority and understanding how to play would not only make the flow of the game better, but it would also help you do better in games in general. And these were my first 5 most common rule mistakes Commander players usually make. Do you have any other experience of mistake you usually see on your tables? Please share it on the comments below. I'll be doing more videos of this as more IDMs come through and as I watch more content and try to pinpoint several issues I see with the gameplay. Thank you all very much for watching. See you in the next video.